Hi, everyone. So, you might remember from a few months ago, or maybe you weren't a subscriber back then, I said I was working on something big. And you might also notice that even though I live in the UK, which is one of the richest countries for archaeology on the planet, I've done very few UK videos. Well, believe it or not, both of those things are linked. And today, we are going to find out why. And today, we actually also have a sponsor of the video. So, let's get out into the town of Reading, where I live, and explore some of the wildest things you can find out in the British countryside. Let's wait for a nicer day, huh? Yep, today I am switching things up a bit, and I am not technically traveling, but I'm still going to be doing archaeology. So, welcome to where I live now, in Reading. And yes, it is Reading, not Reading. Like numerous places in Britain, this town is not pronounced the way it's spelled, and making a pronunciation mistake could get you killed. The reason it's pronounced this way is because this was named for the Anglo-Saxon tribe known as the Raedingas, who were led by a man named Raeda, or Red, who was the leader of said tribe. Now, Reading probably isn't a town you think much of, if you've heard of it at all. It's usually thought of as a railway hub connecting the north, south, and west with London, and as such it's a big feeder community into the city. But the fact is, there is so much more to Reading than there seems. And all around this city, we see a mark of over 1,000 years of history of being a hub into London. The story of Reading starts here, at the confluence of the Thames and the Kennet Rivers. Now, this confluence has been absolutely vital to Reading's history as it linked Bristol and London. Reading thus became a hub for east-west trade and in later times north-south as well. And it's here, in 871, that Reading was first mentioned in the histories as a place where Alfred the Great came to battle the Norse. Well, okay, not here exactly. The Norse camp is actually thought to have been set up around here. But I think this area is a bit of a nicer thing to show you. Here at St. Mary's Square is the original Anglo-Saxon centre of the city. It's named for St. Mary's Church, which has been here since probably the 8th century, perhaps earlier, and not a lot of the early church survives, but there has always been a church at this spot. This whole road that it sits on used to be the major road into town and still does act as one, with a series of bridges and mills that used to be here as well. But the town market actually moved in the 11th century to this spot here, about a kilometer to the east. This was done by William the Conqueror. Following his, conquering of England, he instituted a number of policies that were designed to undermine the old Anglo-Saxon centers of power. Among these policies included removing the town's central administration from this square to this square. And you can still see the effects of this with these dual streets that really slice straight through the town to the new market. In the aftermath, this square was still used, and markets persisted here for generations until a new bridge was built along with a guild hall, shifting all the incoming merchants east as well. Then, this place became where you'd practice archery. They'd shoot arrows at archery butts here, which is why it is also called St. Mary's Butts. It wasn't just peasants, though. Reading's proximity to Windsor Castle also meant that the monarchs of England took a very special interest in it. And the monarch's attachment to this town is best seen in the abbey. This was one of the largest abbeys in Europe at the time that it was built in 1121 by King Henry I. And he was so attached to it that he was ultimately buried here. Or somewhere around here, according to the plaque. There are some suggestions that Henry I's body was lost somewhere underneath that prison, which, by the way, is the same prison where Oscar Wilde served his sentence for homosexuality. The abbey was a pilgrimage point as well, where crusaders took their vows and where you could begin the journey to Santiago de Compostela. Up here, you can see where the stained glass windows would have once stood. And this is just this narrow slice of the church, so imagine how big the rest of it would have been. It's an impressive church, and it was impressively rich. This abbey was run by Benedictines, a monastic order that was headquartered in Monte Cassino, Italy. They were the largest and richest monastic order in Europe, and members of their order were held in high esteem. They were advisors to kings, they acted as educators, and a few even became the Pope. In fact, by the time this abbey was built, as many as a dozen had already served as the Pope. What this means then is that everybody who visited the abbey was treated to a grand show of ostentatious wealth. But it also meant that it wasn't just local people coming here either. People came here from all over Europe not only to worship at the more than 200 relics this abbey boasted, one of them said to be the hand of St. James, but also to see this well in Caversham on the other side of the Thames. This well is also one of Britain's major pilgrimage points. It's dried out now, but it's said that the waters of this well had healing powers. And this abbey is a really interesting example of just how powerful the church and the king were. In addition to Parliament meeting in this room, which is the refectory by the way, this also quickly became the abbey of choice for British monarchs, especially since Henry I had sponsored it. Henry I and Henry II both attended Mass and consecrated archbishops here, and this was practically Henry III's second home. Edward III held John of Gaunt's wedding in the abbey's forecourt, today the Forbury Gardens, and Henry II even consecrated the Archbishop Thomas Becket here. The story of Thomas Becket is quite an interesting one, which is kind of outside the scope of this video, but to make a long story short, Henry II had him assassinated by accident. I swear, that's true. And although today it is a ruin, this abbey is still really interesting to visit. Although there was a lot of reconstruction work done about 20 years ago, it's remarkable how much of the original architecture survives. These holes, for example, used to hold wooden beams which would hold up a second floor. And here you can see the ruins of an old staircase. And this was where the monks lived. These arches still tell you the shape that the roof used to take over the monks' quarters. And that was right above the abbey's wharf, where the abbey would bring in supplies, and it also gave them easy access to the mill, which was here on a minor tributary of the Kennet River. On another note, just check out how short this doorway is, because I'm an average-sized man for the modern world. And even I'm gonna struggle to fit under this. This just shows how much our nutrition has improved. But of course, back when the abbey was up and running, this did provide the main source of nutrition for everybody. This abbey was truly an enormous business empire, and it attracted more people. This church, Greyfriars, was founded by the Franciscans precisely to keep a hold in Reading's religious centre. It is the oldest Franciscan building that still serves a religious function in England, with its original foundations going back to 1311. Religion became central to the town and a source of wealth. This abbey's scale gives us some idea of just how important it was to the town. It was central to the economy, to the point that even guilds weren't allowed in Reading until the mid-13th century, and throughout its existence it was a source of secular local authority, being responsible for appointing the town's mayor. It provided jobs, food, education, and medical care, and it hosted a huge number of very high-ranking nobles and parliamentarians. The Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, Heraclius, even preached here in 1185 along with the head of the Hospitallers, hoping to drum up interest for a new crusade. Now, when Reading Abbey was built, they also gained control of the open fields to the south of the Kennet, a place known as Whitley, which was at the time home to only a small handful of families. And that meant that they suddenly had responsibility for the spiritual well-being of them too. The problem in Whitley was that the river flooded every year, and they couldn't get over to the other two parish churches. Thus, in the 12th century, this church, St. Giles, the third of Reading's 3 surviving original parish churches, was constructed. Reading Abbey did a lot for the town, and it's fair to say that if it hadn't been for the Abbey, Reading as we know it today would not exist. So, what happened to it? Why is it now a ruin? Well, in a picture, this guy. The first Henry giveth, the last Henry taketh away. Henry VIII broke away from the Catholic Church so that he could divorce this woman and marry this woman instead in the hopes of getting a son. The Catholic Church didn't like this, especially as this woman had already been this man's bride, but his untimely death led her to marry Henry instead, a special dispensation the Catholic Church only made for a monarch. So, when he wanted to divorce this woman, mother of this queen, for this woman, the mother of this queen, the church refused. So, Henry's solution was to create his own church with himself as the head. But alas, this woman produced this queen, so she was then replaced with this woman, who gave birth to this king, only to die in childbirth. And this was all legal and religiously allowed because Henry had broken away from this man in this capital. Now, there were a few wives who came after, but that in a nutshell is the story of how the Church of England was created. And Reading's Abbey was a victim of this. The Catholic abbot refused to surrender to Henry. So he was hanged somewhere around here, and the abbey was raided and stripped for parts. In fact, the wealth stripped from this abbey went in part to complete this church, which, in a fit of irony, replaced Reading as the royal family's church of choice. Now, just because the abbey was no longer the dominant power in the town doesn't mean that the royals lost interest in it. Far from it. Indeed, Reading became one of Elizabeth's favorite haunts, which brings us to this corner here. This corner looks very modern, but if we take a closer look, we can see that in here, the George actually retains its original architecture from the 16th century. And right across the street from the George was the home of Francis Walsingham and his nephew, Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex. Robert Devereux was said to be the last great love affair in Queen Elizabeth's life, and it was a good location given that Elizabeth's Reading headquarters is just down the street. This was Elizabeth's palace, the old Abbey Gateway. And once she was done with it, it became a girls' school, which taught Jane Austen how to write. She wasn't alone either. The future British Prime Minister Henry Addington attended the boys' school just across the field in this building, which is also the former Abbey Hospitium, where guests and visitors to the Abbey would have stayed and slept. Today, it's part of the town hall. One last aspect of the Abbey is found in this open green space. See, this knoll next to the wall is where the former ground level used to be, but this was all dug out in the Civil War by royalists to build defensive embankments. It didn't help them. The royalist support here collapsed, and Reading's economy did so with it. It would be over 100 years before the town of Reading could recover, by which time the world had industrialized and Reading had lost a lot of its old prestige. But it actually did recover quite well. Given just how important Reading is to British history, it's hard to understand just why it's so little known. Because the Abbey is just one aspect of Reading. There's so much here I haven't gotten into, especially in the Industrial Revolution. This, for example, is Reading's most historic street. There's also this, which was the world's largest biscuit factory in the Victorian era. And on this street, William III defeated James II to secure the crown of England. There is history everywhere, not just in Reading, but in your town too. So much more than can be covered in just one video. That is where History Treks comes in. Yup, this video is sort of sponsored. Does it count as a sponsorship if you're doing it for free and you've co-founded the company that's about to go live? Whatever, I'm counting it. Point is, this video is sponsored by History Treks, an app that I have co-founded, and it offers you a self-guided walking tour of Reading, narrated by yours truly. We are hoping to expand across the UK one day if this app gets a good start, with our eye on the globe if this concept gains traction, so keep your eyes peeled. And trust me, I left a lot of Reading off of this video. This is actually one of the reasons my videos have been a bit slower to come out, and why I've been a bit lax on some of the other things, like I think I promised Patreon on my last video and then did nothing with it. But you know what? We've been working very, very hard to get this app up and running, and now that it's about to go live, and we've gotten over the most work-intensive aspects, I can focus on this channel again. Anyway, that's all this video has to say on Reading. Please remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel, and until next time, I'm the Archaeologist, and this has, sort of, been The Travels.